Good afternoon. I want to begin my remarks by expressing deep gratitude. First, to God. For thousands of years, the Jewish people carried an astonishing promise. The prophet spoke of a people returning from the ends of the earth, of vineyards on the hill of Judea, and of a nation restored. For centuries, these promises seemed impossible. Empires rose and fell, and the Jewish people endured exile, persecution, and near destruction. And yet, today, in the state of Israel, millions see something remarkable, a God who keeps his promises. And I also want to thank you, Christian leaders, because for decades, Christian friendship has helped make Israel stronger, safer, and less alone. And never has that friendship mattered more than in the aftermath of October 7th. So thank you. Thank you for the many of you who prayed for Israel after October 7th, when silence would have been easier. Thank you to the Christians who came to Israel when others canceled their trips. To those who worked in our farms, tended our fields, packed meals, comforted families, and reminded Israelis that we are not alone. Thank you to the ICEJ, who helped replace ambulances destroyed by Hamas, who helped provide shelter, radios, and trauma care, and support for communities like Kfar Aza, Be'eri, Nativ HaAsara, and elsewhere. And I know that support was never only political. It came from something deeper, from the belief rooted in the Bible we share, that the Jewish people have a right to live in freedom and peace in the land of their ancestors. Thank you for standing with us when it was difficult, when it was unpopular. And that matters, because truth was never about a popularity contest. Israelis understand this very well. In fact, we are quite trained in having unpopular opinions. There are friends here from my time when I served in Norway. And back then in the day, when I was in Oslo, an Israeli friend once joined me for a coffee with local friends. He was just visiting. And every time he shared his opinion, someone politely told him, "You know, almost nobody in Norway thinks like that." After the meeting, he was glowing. He told me, "You see, even the Norwegians think I am an original thinker." I had to explain to him that in Norway, when someone says nobody agrees with you, that's not a compliment. But that is the Israeli spirit. We refuse to believe that truth and popularity are the same thing. When people ask us, "Can it really be that the whole world is wrong and only you are right?" we answer, "Yes, of course it can." And in that sense, Christians around the world understand Israel very well. You also carry convictions the world often mocks. You also know that being popular does not make something true. That was the spirit of the prophets who stood before kings, crowds, and sometimes argued with God. And that was the spirit of Jesus Christ, who stood for truth before power, often alone, and he stared down death itself. When you stand with Israel, you stand in that same spirit. So I came here today with deep gratitude for your support in the past and in the present. But friends, I also come with a deep worry about the future. Worry because the world around us is changing in ways none of us can afford to ignore. Sometimes it feels as if the world has gone so mad that only the famous Israeli motto, my favorite, can explain it. Start worrying, details to follow. So, the madness we see around us, friends, points to two crises happening at the same time. A Middle East losing its minorities, and the West losing its confidence. One crisis empties churches, towns, and communities, and the other empties societies of identity, responsibility, and purpose. These two crises may look disconnected. They are not. In both places, the future people believed to be inevitable broke down. In both cases, old certainties have collapsed. In the Middle East, the old certainty was that Islamic power would endure, that the caliphate would continue, that the Muslim world would remain one of the commanding forces of history. And in the 20th century, the last caliphate disappeared with the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Western powers reshaped the world with modern armies, thriving economies, and innovative science. And many in the Muslim world who were forced to ask a painful question: what went wrong? The West is now facing its own crisis of certainty. For generations, many in the West assumed that history had a clear and inevitable direction. The world would become more secular, more democratic, and more Western. But that certainty has broken down too. The world is not becoming less religious. In many places, it is becoming more religious. The world is not becoming more democratic or more Western. Ancient civilizations are returning with ambition and sometimes resentment. China, Russia, Iran, each in its own way is telling the West, tomorrow does not necessarily belong to you. And the West, which for centuries believed it was shaping the future, suddenly found itself struggling with questions about its own future. The West is now asking itself a very similar question to the one asked in the Middle East: what went wrong? Friends, I am not from the West. I'm here as a friend of the West and as a son of the biblical heritage that formed it. I am here as someone whose own freedoms depend on the strength of the free world. I come from a region where Christians like me know that churches can be full one generation and empty the next. I say this with great pain because I am speaking about the region I come from, the region where my family has lived for centuries, the region where Christianity was born, and the region where so many Christian communities are now fighting not to disappear. So I want to share how my region answered that crisis. When societies ask what went wrong, there are two possible answers. One is responsibility, the other is blame. Responsibility asks, what can we do now? Blame asks, who can we accuse now? Responsibility gives people a purpose. Blame gives people a target. And once a society turns pain into blame, it begins looking for someone to punish. And eventually, the hate destroys the hater. So let us begin with the Middle East. When the old certainty collapsed, many in the region asked, what went wrong? Why is Islam or the Muslim world not dominating history? At first, some answered, religion was holding us back. The solution, they believed, was secular nationalism. It promised power, it promised unity, and it promised liberation. But for the native Jews living in the villages and cities of the Arab world, this movement, once imagined by some as inclusive, became a force of exclusion. As the dream of the Jewish state moved closer to reality, the situation of the Jews in many of the Arab countries deteriorated. Religion was blamed for the weakness, and Jews were blamed for humiliation. Ancient Jewish communities in Iraq, Yemen, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, North Africa, and beyond, many of them not even supporters of Zionism, And they still faced pogroms, intimidation, property seizures, discrimination, and exile. Within a generation, communities that have lived across the region for centuries, since before Islam and before Christianity, were nearly erased. But the culture of blame did not save Arab nationalism. It corroded it from within. It promised dignity, but delivered repression. It promised strength, but delivered military defeats. It promised renewal, but left behind corruption, stagnation, and fear. And into that vacuum came a different answer. Political Islam changed the framing, but it kept the culture of blame. Arab nationalism said religion was the problem. Political Islam said religion is the solution. The problem was not that we were too religious. The problem was that we were not religious enough. And over time, that answer reshaped the region from the Islamic Revolution in Iran to the Muslim Brotherhood all around us. And once again, minorities discovered the same brutal truth. When an ideology cannot tolerate difference, minorities become its first victims. For Christians, the result has been devastating. The ethnic cleansing of Christians from the Middle East is a fact measured in empty churches, abandoned homes, and ancient communities pushed to the edge of disappearance. In Iraq, out of 1.5 million Christians, fewer than 150,000 remain. In Aleppo, in Syria, once a home to a thriving Jewish population, Christian community, they had over 200,000 Christians in Aleppo. Only 25 remain today, at best. In Egypt, on one terrible day in August 2013, at least 46 churches and monasteries were plundered, destroyed, or burned to the ground. Even a Coptic children's orphanage was set on fire. It was the worst attack on Egypt's Christians in centuries. The same hate that drove the Jews out of the Middle East in the 20th century is now driving Christians and other minorities out of the region in the 21st century. Because the hate that begins with Jews never ends with Jews. There was only one difference. When the Jews were driven out, they had Israel. When Christians are driven out, all they have is the airport. Friends, this is not only a Middle Eastern story. It's a human story. And I worry because now the West is facing its own version of that temptation. The crisis is different, but the pattern is familiar. A society loses confidence. It asks, what went wrong? And instead of choosing responsibility, it chooses blame. And this is where hate begins. And again, this is where hate of Jews, anti-Semitism, returns. I saw this warning some years ago when I came to UC Davis in California to speak. A group of students disrupted my talk, and they shouted about globalizing the Intifada, and they carried a sign that said 1948 equals 1492. At first, I thought they were mourning the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492. I thought, it's impressive, not every campus protester remembers Sephardic history. But no, they were comparing what they saw as two original sins. 1948, the creation of Israel, and 1492, the discovery of America. In their minds, Israel and America were part of the same crime. And that is when I understood that something deeper was happening. This was not only criticism of Israeli policy. This is a worldview in which the West is reduced to shame. Colonialism, imperialism, racism, you name it. America is reduced to oppression, and Israel is reduced to colonialism. And the Jewish people, under the new label as Zionists, as cast as the symbol of everything wrong with the world. People back then told me that they will grow out of it, they're just students. But after October 7th, before Israel had even buried its dead, demonstrations against Israel erupted across the West. Their slogans were not about peace, and they were not about compassion. They were a declaration that the ultimate target for the sins of the West has been chosen: the Jews, Israel, Zionists. And that is the culture of blame on the left side. The West is guilty, and Zionism is its worst expression. But friends, the same sickness now appears on parts of the far right. There, the story is different. Sure, they say, things aren't going well, but you're fine. You're innocent. It is all the fault of someone else. And more openly, we hear that sentence: it's all the fault of the Jews. The Jews lied and manipulated. The Jews control the elites. The Jews drags us to war. The Jews betrayed the West. And this is where the far left, the far right, and radical Islam begin to sound strangely alike. They disagree on almost everything, but they share the same escape of responsibility. The far left says the West is guilty and Zionism is its worst expression. The far right says the West was betrayed and the Jews are behind it. And Islamists say the Muslim world was humiliated and Israel is to blame. And that is why anti-Semitism is never only a Jewish problem. It is a warning sign. It tells you that resentment is becoming a substitute to courage. Blame cannot build families. Blame cannot restore communities. Blame cannot heal loneliness. Blame can only point the finger. Responsibility builds. Responsibility carries two ideas: responding and the ability. And I pray to God that Israel and the West will choose responsibility over blame. Thank you.